Over the years, SpongeBob SquarePants has become one of the most iconic cartoons of all time. And with that kind of success, it's no surprise that other shows have tried copying. But sometimes, those inspired shows end up looking a little too familiar. In this video, we're going to be breaking down what happened to 3 of the worst SpongeBob copies in history. Sit tight and buckle up, because the shamelessness of some of these shows is going to blow you away. Coconut Fred's Fruit Salad Island. Coconut Fred's Fruit Salad Island is probably one of the most obvious SpongeBob ripoffs ever made. And it's so wild that Warner Bros. Thought they could pull this off. This tropical show aired on Kids WB from 2005 to 2006, and somehow managed to last 2 seasons before everyone realized what was happening. The premise is basically just SpongeBob with different costumes. Instead of building something new, Warner Bros. Tried to reskin SpongeBob with fruit, and even their own cast admitted it. The creators didn't really try to hide what they were doing. They just moved the action from underwater to a tropical island. The character copying in Coconut Fred is almost like a lazy skin mod of SpongeBob. Fred has the same wide-eyed, manic energy, but less hard. His banana buddies are just Patrick split in two. And Mr. Mel Greenrind? He's Squidward in watermelon form. Except instead of playing the clarinet, he just complains and squeaks on a board. These are just rebranded clones in a tropical disguise. Even the scared cherry character feels like it came straight from SpongeBob's supporting cast. It's like they took original characters and just gave them fruit makeovers. Here's the really interesting part. The show's own voice actor eventually admitted what everyone was thinking. Rob Paulson, who voiced Coconut Fred, later said at Comic-Con that the show was a shameless ripoff of SpongeBob SquarePants. When the person actually voicing your main character can't defend the show's originality, that's pretty telling. It's rare to see someone involved in a production be that honest about what they were working on. The animation style was clearly inspired by SpongeBob too. Same bright colors, same simple character designs, same weird world where normal rules don't apply. The 11-minute episode format was identical, and even the type of humor felt very familiar. It's like they took SpongeBob's visual recipe and just changed some of the ingredients. Critics weren't too impressed with the result. Common Sense Media gave it 2 out of 5 stars and called it the TV equivalent of sugary cereal and nothing more. The show seemed to assume that kids wouldn't notice the similarities, which probably wasn't the best approach, since kids are usually pretty good at spotting when something feels like a copy of their favorite shows. The show's run was pretty short-lived. It only lasted 13 episodes before getting canceled, which suggests that audiences and networks eventually figured out that copying SpongeBob's formula wasn't enough to make a successful show. Kids could tell it wasn't quite the same as the original, and parents probably weren't fooled either. What makes this situation interesting is how it shows the difference between being inspired by something and just copying it directly. Lots of shows take ideas from successful cartoons, but Coconut Fred felt like it was using SpongeBob's exact playbook without adding much that was new or different. It's like they thought changing the setting and characters would be enough to make it feel original. Coconut Fred shows why just copying something popular isn't enough. The show had energy, but it didn't have its own identity. It followed SpongeBob's formula so closely that it felt more like a knockoff than its own thing. And in the end, that's what held it back. If it had tried to do something different, something original, it might have stood a chance. Instead, it just reminded people of a better show. But before I tell you about the literal ripoff, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any videos like these. SpongeBob SquarePants in Tran. SpongeBob in Tran is probably one of the most bizarre SpongeBob ripoffs out there, and it's wild that somebody actually thought they could get away with this Iranian bootleg disaster. This animated train wreck aired in Iran on December 18, 2017, and it's basically what happens when you take SpongeBob's characters and dump them into Tehran without any permission, creativity, or basic understanding of how animation works. The premise is completely ridiculous. SpongeBob and Patrick somehow travel to Iran for the first time and get distracted by hamburgers until they notice something happening. That's literally it. The plot makes no sense because how exactly do underwater sea creatures from Bikini Bottom end up in Tehran? The whole setup is so poorly thought out that it feels like someone just threw SpongeBob characters into a random location generator and called it a day. What makes this whole thing absolutely outrageous is that it was produced completely illegally. The creators didn't bother getting permission from Nickelodeon or Paramount, which means this entire project was basically piracy disguised as a movie. This was an unauthorized fever dream with SpongeBob's face glued onto it. The technical quality is absolutely terrible. The animation looks like it was made by someone who learned to animate from watching YouTube tutorials for 5 minutes. It's got that cheap knockoff quality that makes you think of those awful Dingo Pictures movies or other bargain bin animation studios. The backgrounds look like they were literally copied and pasted from Google Images, and there are animation errors everywhere you look. Characters clip through objects, the movements are jerky and unnatural, and the whole thing has that unmistakable bootleg aesthetic. But here's where it gets really disturbing. There are some seriously messed up scenes that have no business being in anything SpongeBob related. One scene shows Mr. Krabs pointing guns at SpongeBob, which is completely insane for for a character who's supposed to be a father figure. That's not SpongeBob humor. That's nightmare fuel that would traumatize kids. The movie is also filled with pointless filler that makes no sense. There's a 6-minute sequence of SpongeBob and his friends just sitting in Tran traffic, which is probably the most boring thing you could possibly put in a SpongeBob movie. They also waste time showing the characters eating Iranian food and watching soccer games, which adds nothing to the story and feels like padding to reach a longer runtime. The whole project reeks of false advertising too. Sandy Cheeks appears prominently in the movie poster, making it look like she has a major role, but she's completely absent from the actual film. The plot description talks about SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship, but the real story is about them traveling to Iran because the Krusty Krab ran out of some special Iranian sauce. It's like they couldn't even be honest about their own terrible plot. What's really telling is how this movie ends, or rather, how it doesn't end. The film just stops abruptly with a cliffhanger because it was never actually finished. After 44 minutes of bootleg nonsense, viewers are left hanging because the creators apparently couldn't even be bothered to complete their own project. It's the perfect metaphor for the whole lazy, half-hearted effort. The reception was exactly what you'd expect. The movie currently has a pathetic 4.5 out of 10 rating on IMDb, and the viewers have called it nothing more than an advertisement for Tran. The consensus seems to be that it's so bad it's almost entertaining, but even that's being generous. Most people who've seen it describe it as a complete waste of time that manages to be both boring and offensive at the same time. What makes this story even more interesting is what happened to the cartoon after it aired. While there's no official word about cancellation or legal action from Paramount or Nickelodeon, the fact that it was an illegal bootleg production means it was essentially operating in a legal gray area from day one. The creators managed to air it on Iranian television and even produce sequel, but the whole operation was built on stolen intellectual property. The movie seems to have survived mainly because it was produced and aired in Iran, where international copyright enforcement can be more complicated. However, its terrible quality and obvious copyright infringement meant it never had a chance of legitimate distribution anywhere else in the world. What happened to this mess? Well, it somehow spawned 3 equally terrible sequels, which proves that some people never learn from their mistakes. There's SpongeBob in Kandahar, Bobby and Bobo in Iran, Save the Sybil Gold, and SpongeBob in Tehran 2, Alien Friends. The fact that they made sequels to this disaster shows that the creators were completely delusional about the quality of their work and apparently faced no serious legal consequences for their copyright theft. SpongeBob in Tehran is a good example of how bad things can go when a cartoon is made without permission or care. It used familiar characters in a way that didn't make sense, and the story was all over the place. The animation was rough, the jokes didn't land, and some scenes were just strange. It's not the kind of thing most people would watch more than once, but it's definitely something you don't forget. Not because it was great, but because it was so unexpected. However, the next show that's been accused of copying SpongeBob is Fishhooks. This show follows 3 teenage fish, Milo, Oscar, and Bia, as they navigate life in a giant fish tank at a pet store called Bud's Pets. At first glance, everything about this show screams SpongeBob ripoff. Both shows feature talking fish living in underwater environments with quirky sea creature friends, and the similarities don't stop there. When you look at the main characters, it's pretty obvious they're based on SpongeBob's trio. Fishhooks takes the SpongeBob trio template and tries to age it up for middle schoolers, but instead of making them deeper, it just makes them louder. Milo feels like SpongeBob after 10 energy drinks. Oscar plays the anxious voice of reason, but he's more sad than funny. Bia is loud, dramatic, and self-obsessed. Less of a character and more of a walking stereotype. It's like someone turned SpongeBob into a high school drama club audition tape. Even their color schemes match up pretty well. Milo's got that bright, cheerful look like SpongeBob, while Oscar's design mirrors Squidward's more muted tone. The supporting characters feel even more copied. There's Jocktopus, the school bully who's basically a jock version of various SpongeBob antagonists. Albert Glass is the nerdy, smart kid who gets picked on, filling the same role as characters like Plankton but without any of the personality. Even the setting feels familiar. Instead of Bikini Bottom, we get Freshwater High, but it's still an underwater community where fish go to school and deal with everyday problems. What makes Fishhooks feel like such a blatant copy is how it tries to use SpongeBob's formula but makes it more teenage. The episodes follow the same structure, short segments where characters get into weird situations that reset by the next episode. But instead of SpongeBob's innocent, work-focused adventures, Fishhooks is all about typical high school drama like crushes, popularity contests, and trying to fit in. It's like they took SpongeBob's world and aged it up without understanding what made the original special. The animation style also feels like a knockoff attempt. While SpongeBob has its clean, simple 2D look that works perfectly for the surreal humor, Fishhooks mixes 2D animation with photo collages and real textures. It looks weird and feels like they're trying too hard to be different while still copying everything else. The humor tries to capture SpongeBob's random visual comedy, but falls flat most of the time, relying on obvious jokes and teenage stereotypes instead of genuine creativity. So, is Fishhooks a ripoff of SpongeBob? Absolutely. Fishhooks feels like Disney tried to build their own SpongeBob using checklists and focus groups, but forgot to include a soul. The characters, setting, episode structure, and even basic concept concept are all borrowed from SpongeBob's playbook. SpongeBob's charm comes from its joy and simplicity. Fishhooks replaces that with forced teen drama and random slapstick. SpongeBob's humor feels genuine and creative, while Fishhooks seems more calculated and corporate. It tries to seem more mature by focusing on teenage issues, but in doing so, it loses the charm and innocence that makes SpongeBob fun for both kids and adults. As for what happened to Fishhooks, the show ran for 3 seasons from 2010 to 2014, but never achieved the success Disney was hoping for. The ratings were decent, but nothing spectacular, and it never became a cultural phenomenon like SpongeBob. Critics were pretty harsh about it being a knockoff, and even kids seemed to prefer the original. By 2014, Disney quietly canceled the show without much fanfare. Unlike some canceled shows that get fan campaigns to bring them back, Fishhooks just disappeared, and nobody really fought to save it. The show's creator moved on to other projects, and Disney learned that you can't just copy someone else's homework and expect the same results. Fishhooks became a perfect example of what happens when corporate executives try to recreate magic without understanding what made it magical in the first place. If you made it this far, then don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.